Hi, everybody. So, welcome everyone to our Digital Identity Program National Stakeholder event. I'm excited to see about 300 people have signed up to join us today. When we first started hosting events like this, we were hosting stakeholder meetings for around 50 people in a church hall in Nicholson Street in Edinburgh. So this is quite a step, seeing so many people engage with our work at one time. I am Susie Braham. I work in the Digital Directorate in Scottish Government. I lead on policy and digital identity and also the communications and stakeholder engagement activity. And this event is part of this work. I've been with this program since it started almost 4 years ago. So before we start, just to run quickly through the agenda. Today's speakers are all from within the Scottish Government team working on digital identity. We'll start with an introduction from Colin Cook, our Director Digital. Mike, Claire and Tom are going to talk to you about our programme and roadmap and the scope of the programme. James is our service design lead and he's going to talk about the prototype. Daniel is going to tell us about our approach to user research, and then there's a short break, and then the second half is a panel Q&A session. Just before we kick off, I want to highlight a few areas of housekeeping, really. I mean, obviously I'm not going to tell you where your fire exits are or where to get your tea or coffee, but hopefully you've all figured that out by now. But I want to talk about how you can engage with this event and engage with the wider program. First of all, audience participation. The trade-off in having so many people join an online event, it's a lot harder to see your hands go up or invite you to speak in person. We have a question box for you to pose your questions for our panel. Please put them directly onto the live site. We're going to go through as many of these as we can during the second half. The second point, which is a very important one for us, one of the tabs at the top of the live event site is a button that will take you to a form to sign up for future involvement. Please fill out this form to get involved with this work. That's a kind of important step for us. Third, if you want to tweet about the event, we have a hashtag DigitalScotsID. There's also, I should point out, and there's a link to the feedback form. When you leave the event today, we would really welcome your feedback on the event. All of the materials from today, the slides, also we're planning to record the live stream. They'll all be made available to you. We'll post them on our Digital Scots blog, so you can watch again at your leisure and read through the slides at your leisure too. And one final thing I wanted to mention before we kick off, this event is what we see as a way of renewing our approach to wider engagement and involvement in our work. The programme has had a long-standing commitment to the principles and practice of open government. Now, there's still a lot more that we need to do to make this approach work and to make this work as open as possible. And the way that you engage with us, I hope, will be an important part of that. We already have an expert group. We have a national stakeholder group involved in the work too. Our intention is to follow this event with more focused and targeted engagement with different sectors around the policies and themes of this work. And this is where we really need your help to influence the overall policy direction. So that's what I was going to mention. Thank you very much for joining today. I'm going to hand over to Colin Cook, who is our Director Digital for Scottish Government, and he's also the Strategic Responsible Officer for the Digital Identity Programme. Thanks. Over to you, Colin.
Thank you, Susie, and welcome everybody. It's great to see so many people here, many of whom I know and many are new to me. I've been asked to give an introduction today and to really just try and talk about the role that this programme has within Scotland's wider digital ambitions. And I'll try and do that, if I may, with reference to the new digital strategy, Scotland's new digital strategy that we published in March this year. Now, this strategy, two things I think to start with. The first is that it's not about, explicitly not about, the application of technology per se. It's about how do we prepare this country and ensure that this country is successful in a digital world in which it's easy to network, in which things happen more quickly, that you're more accountable than you ever were before. The second important thing I think to recognize about this strategy is that it's a joint strategy between national and local government. And I think that's a really important statement of how, in a digital world, everything depends upon collaboration. And I think it's an important background factor when you think about today and the messages that we're about to share about digital identity. Because what we're talking about is a common approach to identity that is capable of operating across all public services and not being limited or defined by the organization from which you receive those services. Now, I'm just going to highlight some issues within the strategy. It's a strategy that I would recommend that anyone reads. It talks about people and place. It talks about the role of the digital economy in Scotland. And it talks about the way in which we believe we need to change the way government works and the services we offer. But there's a few central messages that I just wanted to pull out today. The first is this notion that digital infrastructure is the critical national infrastructure of the country in a modern digital world. And we've seen that during the pandemic. I mean, it's been digital infrastructure that many of us have relied upon to keep in contact with our family and friends. It's digital infrastructure we have relied upon to do shopping and all sorts of things that we perhaps wouldn't have done before. So I think the role of digital infrastructure is now established as being part of what makes the country tick. And when we talk about infrastructure, we don't just mean the cables that run in the ground or the mobile signals that you can use. We also mean the services, and in this case, the public services that we offer, because they are also part of the infrastructure and they need to be secure and they need to be resilient and they need to be usable. And I think that's important for today. The second key factor is inclusivity. This is a strategy for everybody. And again, I think we've seen during recent year that if you're not included in the benefits of the digital economy and the digital world, it can have a hugely detrimental effect upon the way you live. And so the strategy is about making sure that services are accessible, that everybody can use them, and that they're designed to be inclusive as possible. The third point that I wanted to draw out, and I think this is relevant for today as well, positioning of Scotland, or an ambition of Scotland, to be seen and recognised across the world as an ethical digital nation. A nation that recognises the vast number of new challenges that are raised by the digital world. Protecting privacy, keeping ourselves safe online, protecting from online harms, how one regulates the tech industry. All these are massive new issues, and they can't always be solved by one nation alone. But what we want to do in Scotland is to have clear position on them, to live by those principles, and then to engage internationally on those issues and have a role for Scotland in those debates. Fourthly, the strategy talks about innovation and the role of government within an ecosystem of innovative partners, of working different ways with the sector, to use public sector challenges to stimulate new thoughts, to have teams where we draw on the very best of the private sector, and indeed the sector and other sectors of the government. So not just an exclusive strategy for government, but one that positions government within a network of organizations. And finally, let me talk a little bit about, because I think it's so important for today, about what the strategy means for the way in which government operates. Firstly, it means a commitment to put users at the heart of the way in which we design and we deliver services. And I think you'll see that today. Secondly, it means a commitment to operating across our traditional boundaries, of exchanging data safe and appropriate to do so, of using common standards, of using common platforms. And that is a pretty good segue into the rest of today, because what we're talking about here is a different approach to identity, to not having separate identity systems for different parts of government, but having a shared approach, and one that is owned and run by the citizen themselves. So that's the background in terms of the strategy. And I hope, if nothing else, I've left you with the recognition that this project, this digital identity project, is critical to the strategy as a whole. We want to build an identity service that carries with it the trust of the people of Scotland. It demands that, it relies upon it for its success. We want to build an identity service that people recognize as being consistent with the values of an ethical digital nation, one that puts people in control, that allows people to choose when and how they use it. And we want to build an identity service which is at the heart of our approach to government and the way in which government operates in public service reform. So it's a huge challenge for us. And that's why I'm so excited to see nearly 300 people with us today, because this is the kind of event that helps us build that trust and build that confidence. It demonstrates that we're trying to work in the open. And I hope that we have a really vibrant and helpful debate today. Thank you.
I'd like to add my thanks to those who have gone before for you for coming. It's difficult to do these types of events the way that we've done them in the past due to COVID restrictions. So we hope that this format will be suited to these new conditions. I am going to speak very, very carefully though, because one of the things that I do notice already is that the text is not ideally suited to fast speech, because we've already seen that we're going to kick off a Toyota Hilux and we're going to wash again at your lighter. So I will be very, very careful in what I say, just in case you're relying on those subtitles. So as Susie said, it does mean that a lot more people are able to attend. So some of you will have been with us through the last 2 years, while some may be coming to this entirely new. So do forgive me if I go over old ground to ensure everyone gets a complete picture of what we are proposing. So first, let's deal with the elephant in the room. Right at the start, right from the outset. These are all the things that this isn't. It's not an ID card. It's not an ID database. It's not Big Brother tracking you across the state. It's not the mass indiscriminate sharing of data between government departments. And it's not the public sector selling your data to private companies and advertisers. To be clear, if it was any of those things, I wouldn't be working on it. But to say what it is not so easy. So let's start with our vision. Our vision is a safe and easy way for people to prove that they are eligible for a public service or benefit online. We need people to have trust and confidence that this service is safe and secure. That is absolutely clear. We also need it to be a universal approach so that it can be used throughout the public sector in Scotland. We are clear that no one should be left behind. And that's the inclusive approach. So we are not seeking to exclude people from the services they need. Quite the opposite. It's part of a broader public services offering where offline services are also available when needed. And to achieve this, let's start with the concept of identity in a traditional sense. And it's very much what you see on the screen. When people talk of identity documents, what they generally mean is driving license and passport. But of course, the first is a proof of entitlement to drive a certain class of vehicle. And the second is basically certification that when you leave the country, you're allowed back in. Neither is really an identity document, but both have the benefit of containing a photograph, making it easier to match with a living person. But of course, if all we do is turn an identity, in turning an identity into a digital identity, is create digital versions on our phones, then we will have missed an opportunity for real transformation of public services. And we won't have dealt with the inequality of access to those modern digital services either. Firstly, by concentrating on this traditional route, we continue to share more data than is necessary, sharing name, address, date of birth, place of birth, biometric information to prove an age entitlement. And secondly, we continue the equality of access. If we look at driving licenses as an example, while over 75% of people from a white ethnic background possess a license, that falls to barely above 50% for other ethnic backgrounds. We simply cannot reproduce that in a digital world. So, what is the problem? Well, as Colin has said, as the public sector landscape changes, the way people want to interact is also changing. And that, to some extent, has been forced upon many people by the COVID. It has accelerated that change. And to access those services, people may need to prove who they are online or prove their eligibility for the service. And people want to do that in a simple, safe and secure way, only exchanging as much information as necessary, whilst not having to repeat the process over and over again. But if we boil these sentiments down, there are two basic scenarios when you interact with the public sector. The first is, firstly, I'll say this is just an example of a public sector login. Don't read anything into my choice and don't feel got at Edinburgh Council. The first is where you are interacting with an organisation that knows you, or where it doesn't need to be certain about who you are. You're basically saying, "Hi, it's me," or "Hi, it's me again." And where that service is of low value, it may be that this is all it needs to know. There could be no need for the presentation or validation of personal data. And so if you want to be Donald Duck at Hotmail or crazy Russian hacker at Gmail, then that's your choice. Where you interact with them to gain the service, you can reveal your true inner self and be verified by that organization. The problem is when you have to do this multiple times with multiple organizations. And again, don't feel picked on if you've joined Edinburgh Council in the presentation of various login screens. But whether you're trying to generate a disclosure certificate, apply for benefits, grants or loans, or pay for your brown bin to be emptied, what tends to happen then is that faced with a multiplicity of logins, we circumvent security by using the same details for every login. We write our passwords down, or we give in and do what everyone does when submitting a tax self-assessment through HMRC once a year and reset the password every time we access the service. And how many public sector bodies and services are there in Scotland? Well, currently 128. We'll see what the new government brings to add or detract from that. But they are executive agencies, advisory NDPBs, public corporations, health bodies, and many, many more. And of course, while many of these don't have direct interaction with individuals, many others have services which are delivered by arm's length companies, arm's length bodies, charities, or social enterprises. So, the answer is obvious. One secure login for Scotland's public services. Security dealt with centrally, allowing services to concentrate on the delivery of the core offering of their service. The second problem happens once I've created that account with the individual service. I need to prove things about me. So it's me saying, "Hi, it's Mike Crockett," or "Hi, it's an over 18 person." It can feel like you're carrying the same documents, certificates, bills, letters, and signed photographs to multiple locations for them to photocopy and retain far more information than they need. The model should be very different. It should be much more like this. And here you can see me sitting at my virtual desk, controlling access to the Facts About Me bank. Those same organizations queued up, waiting, can ask me for access to know those verified or proven facts, whether I live in Perth, what my name is, or they can offer me facts that they have proven about me. I'm definitely, believe me, over 18. But it's up to me and my consent whether I share them with anyone else. So finally, and most importantly, this service needs to be trusted by individuals and services that it is secure and privacy protecting. So, to be clear, you can choose to use this service. It will not be mandatory. You have choice and control over when and how you store, share, and reuse your personal information once it has been checked. There will be a clear and easy to understand public privacy policy, which we are already working on. Transparency and understanding of what is being done is key for this service. And there will be clear signposted ways of accessing services for those who cannot or do not want to use this digital route, whilst, of course, making it as easy as possible to make it through the digital route, because this is about democratisation of access to Scotland's public services. And of course, there would be the right to complain, consistent with many other Scottish public sector guidance. So thank you very much for that. I'll be around in the second half answering your questions, but now I'm going to hand over to Claire Lumsden, who is our Senior Product Manager on the project.
Thanks, Mike. And good afternoon, everybody. This event marks the start of a key phase for us, and it's a great point to be able to have the chance to share our roadmap with you and to explain a bit more about the approach that we are taking. We've recently appointed a development partner to work with us over the next 2 years to bring the vision that Mike set out so well to life. So work is starting in earnest, and we can only do this with the involvement of stakeholders. So please do get in touch through the channels that Susie outlined if you could be part of developing the future. My priority on this programme is to make sure that the service that we ultimately deliver meets the needs of end users and the service customers, and that it's beneficial and meets high standards of security, inclusion, reliability, and privacy. Our approach to delivering is agile and iterative. We're starting small and thinking big, with a focus on keeping moving and learning more about the needs and priorities of our end users and our service customers as we go. We hope that many of you will get involved over the coming months. Throughout the development of the service, we will be focusing on meeting users' needs while ensuring high levels of ethics, trusts, and user control. And through this, we'll build a standards-led platform that's an important part of Scotland's digital public service ecosystem. Our aim is to develop a trusted and secure system for users to prove who they are and that they're eligible for services. And we will deliver this ambitious vision, but we will do this by taking small steps along the way, adjusting our course as we go to ensure that the version of the vision that we deliver is useful, usable, and secure, and allows people to access and prove their eligibility more quickly and more easily. Our intention is to launch a live sign-on service before the end of 2021. This will provide a secure front door to multiple public services, tackling the first problem that Mike set out. From an initial launch with one organisation, we'll open up to more public services while improving and adding features based on what we learn. Alongside this, we'll also be developing an efficient route for public services to join up. recognising their needs for easy, affordable integration with their existing services. Our aim is that by late 2022, our sign-on service will be fully functional with easy self-service onboarding for organisations, adding real value for end users through allowing them to sign in for many services across the Scottish public sector. And we'll be getting closer to that vision of one sign-in for Scotland. Alongside this, we're working with end users and service customers to design a system to solve the second problem that Mike set out. This will allow people to share and reuse their information across public services when they choose to, and to prove their identity. At the heart of this is the concept of users controlling their data and ensuring privacy at all times. We intend to develop the ability to save and reuse information and to prove who you are in iterations during 2022, with each improved version offering both end users and service customers more benefits. And we're looking to release this value as early as we possibly can in our roadmap. A key focus will be working with organisations to ensure that our service is easy to integrate with their existing technology, business processes and customer journeys. And we're always conscious of the need to ensure that seamless access to all public services is maintained as we develop, and we will ensure that each step we take adds value, improving things for both end users and public services. In 2023, our full service will be live, meaning that accessing and proving eligibility will be easier and more secure, and enabling transformation across the Scottish public sector. But of course, that won't be the end of the story. As technology enables us to develop easier and better options and opportunities, we will evolve, always with our users at the heart of every step. And I'm now going to hand over to Tom, who's going to tell you a bit more about our scope and the organisations that we're working with.
Thanks, Claire. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom, and I'm the Service Customer Relationship Lead for the programme, and I'll say a little bit more about that role in a few minutes. But first of all, I want to touch on a little bit around the programme scope. So as Mike and Claire have both covered already, we're clear that this has been developed and delivered by the public sector for people to use in their interactions with public services. It's about empowering them, giving them smoother access to services, and providing them better and safer control of the information they provide, which is, after all, their information. As Mike has also said, it's important to highlight that people will have choice and indeed consent features at all stages within the service. If we don't want to use the service, if we don't want to store our information for later reuse, that's our choice. We'll all be asked if we want to use it and not made to do so. But it's also worth highlighting again what this will not do. We're not talking about the sharing of data from government organisations to, for example, private sector organisations, whether they be banks, shops, social media firms, or whoever else. Indeed, nor are we even talking about the bulk sharing of data from one government organisation to another government organisation. Rather, again, we are talking about empowering individuals, if they wish, to store and control their data themselves, and in doing so, have better and safer access to public services. But alongside that benefit to individuals, we believe that we will also deliver benefits to public services as a whole. We want to enable organisations who deliver those services to concentrate, even more than they already do, on the quality of their core offering. We don't think they should have to spend as much time and effort establishing and maintaining secure and accessible logins. We're building a credential for any to use that will be highly secure and meet the government's existing high standards on usability and accessibility. And nor do we think those public services should spend as much time and effort repeatedly verifying details a user has provided, particularly when other parts of the public sector machine have likely already spent time and money doing that. We want to help retain the value of that investment the first time it's made, in effect to bank it and get later and repeated returns. To achieve all this, we're seeking to understand what people want and need when seeking to access services digitally, what they understand about keeping themselves and their information safe. After James shortly goes on to show you some of what we're working on, Daniel will tell you a little bit more about the focus we're placing on research with people to achieve this understanding. But another of our focuses is on building strong, lasting relationships with the various organisations currently delivering public services who we foresee being able to adopt and benefit from our work Such a relationship is key so we can understand the priorities, needs and circumstances of them all to ensure we shape the identity service to suit their needs and the needs of their end users. So this is the role that I play along with colleagues in the programme. We're reaching out to a range of organisations to raise this awareness and joint understanding. But how far do we think we can reach? Well, how far indeed do public services themselves reach? Now, I want to be clear, the slide that's in front of you now is just an indication of the organisations we're currently aiming to reach out to as we speak. Although very keen to note, with thanks, the Independent Living Fund Scotland for the very close working as a confirmed early adopter. Working most closely with them as they look to make their funding and application processes more accessible. And again, this is simply intended to evidence how wide we're reaching out and how ambitious indeed we are. We want to ensure the service will be able to deliver for as wide a range of people and organisations as possible. And there are, of course, many more besides who deliver public services across Scotland, including, for example, from the third sector. And as Claire's highlighted, we're only too well aware that we need to build incrementally over time and adapt and evolve as we look to bring organisations on board. But to do that successfully, we first need to listen and hear what needs and pressures they have and learn about their own users' needs. And as you'd expect, this is something we're looking to do alongside a range of Scottish Government digital platforms that Colin mentioned earlier on, and other programmes of work such as Social Security Scotland. Now, having recently appointed our development partner, we're starting to take even bigger steps towards sharpening our offer and be able to more clearly compare that offer to the development plans of all those potential partner organisations. So it's exciting times, and we're really pleased to see a really good number of attendees today from a range of those organisations, many of whom we've already been in touch with in some way, shape or form, and many of whom we hope to continue speaking to in the weeks and months ahead. And indeed, I've already seen a number of questions from some of you attending, asking how to get involved, and that's something we're really keen for people to do. So please do get in touch either with me directly or through any of the channels that Susie's touched on already, and indeed we'll share those opportunities later on as well. But anyway, I'll stop there and I'll now pass on to James to give us a better sense of what this might all look like and to make it feel even more real. So thanks for listening.
Good start. Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. I'm James. I'm the lead service designer for Digital Identity Scotland, and I just wanted to start off by giving a very brief overview of user-centered design for the program. Okay, so our user-centered design team is made up of service design, which is my area, user research, which Daniel will be speaking about shortly, UX design and interaction design, so that's the design of user flows and prototypes, and content design, the writing and editing and publishing of user-centered content. To ensure our approach is appropriate and consistent with Scottish Government design principles, we must design a service that's inclusive and accessible, valuable and collaborative. So inclusive and accessible design means that the design of the service should take into account the needs of anyone who might encounter it, regardless of context, experience, or ability. This is to ensure that the service will be inclusive, accessible, and usable for people across Scotland. And it also means that when people cannot access or navigate through the service, perhaps because of particular accessibility or contextual needs, that we design alternatives to make sure those people still have pathways that work for them. Valuable. So the service has absolutely valuable. It has to offer real value to real people. And in this case, that's members of the public who interact with it as end users. But also it has to be valuable for our service customers, the organisations that might integrate digital identity into their services. So any journeys, interaction flows or features that we design need to reflect and be informed by what we learn from users about the needs of our users and our service customers as well. Okay, so collaborative design. So collaboration is basically the bedrock of service design. So this means that we design the service across disciplines within the digital identity team. So policy, privacy, security, technical experts, everybody that's involved in the team has to play a part in service design, but also importantly together with users and service customers. And an example of collaborative design is the service map that I have a a snapshot of here that you can see, and this is the tool that we're using to illustrate the service across what we call service moments. So you might just be able to make out, but there are sort of columns there with blue tabs at the top of them. And each one of those columns is a service moment, which are basically phases of service experience that cover touch points and actions for end users, service customers, but also including business processes and the backstage of the digital identity service, and how those relationships between those various actions work and how they should work. It's very much a work in progress at this point. So we're working with some partners to help us develop this service map to becoming a full service blueprint. But we really encourage and are grateful for all potential service customers to become involved in this and help us shape it directly around the needs of your organizations. So, I think everybody else has mentioned this as well, but we really welcome any collaboration with us to help us do that. Okay, so another important collaborative design tool, or a critical design tool, is prototyping. So here are some example screens of the prototyping work that we've been doing to test our concepts with users. I must reinforce at this point that these screens are merely clickable UI prototypes, so they're not the final product by any means. However, prototypes do offer us a level of interaction that allows us to simulate how the service might look to an end user, which in turn enables us to test some proposed interactions before we get into development. And the reason for that is that any service or product design proposal is always has a level of speculation about what might be easy or hard for users, or what might make sense to them or not. So by testing prototypes along with other user research methods, we can reduce the likelihood that our users will encounter problems when interacting with the service. So this one that you see here, this screen, is applying for a benefit on the Social Security Scotland website. Even though they're accessing the digital identity service, we want to make sure that the experience is as seamless as possible so that it doesn't feel like they're jumping out of one service and into another. So screen one, so this is what the user sees when they choose the option to proceed with digital identity when applying for the service. It's an introduction page where we inform the user about digital identity, why they should create an account, or if they already have an account, that they can sign in at this point. So this screen is a page where they see if they click for more information from the previous page. So this is just an explanation basically about what digital identity is and the benefits that it could offer to a user. So when they start the sign-up process, we begin by informing the user about what steps they're about to go through, and also what they will need to proceed. Then they enter their email. They then create a password, and we give instructions on how they should go about doing that. Now, this screen is one that we use to test an authentication method with some security questions. And in the test of this one, we did encounter some usability problems, which can then in turn inform how we design this journey. This is another authentication method, but this time it's one-time password authentication by SMS or text message. So this is the screen that they see to instruct them to do that. And this is the email verification screen that requests the user to check their email for our verification message. This is an example of the email that they would receive at this point to verify. And once that's done, this is the confirmation that their account is now verified and active. Okay, and now this is back to the application. At this point, they can proceed with applying for the service. So it seems like a lot of steps, that, but actually in reality, that should be quite a quick process. Right, so we'll continue to develop these prototypes as we move through the design and development phases, and we'll be testing them at appropriate times with appropriate users, and then iterating these up to a higher fidelity. But that's it for me. So that leads nicely into user research. So I'll hand over to Daniel at this point.
Thanks, Shapes. Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm a user researcher, the user research lead for digital identity in the Scottish Government. So regarding user research, this is what I'm going to try to cover. First of all, user research might be new to you, so I'm going to try to cover what this is all about, especially talking about who you are and what does research means for you. Then I'm going to talk about user research in the context of user-centered design and the Scottish approach to service design. And lastly, user research for digital identity, our approach. I'm going to just show you some milestones we reach and the work we are doing currently. So first of all, I'm not going to go in depth on definitions for user research. You can do that work. You can Google about user research on your own. I'm not going to try to cover that. But I'm interested to align everybody on what user research could mean for you. So let's find out who you are, and then I'll talk you through what user research means for you. So to me, there could be three types of persons trying to understand what user research is about. You might be just curious about it. In that case, user research means just a way for organizations to understand the people we serve better. That's really all you need to know about it. If you work on product or service strategy for some organization, user research also means that that's a way of enabling you to take better decisions and anticipating problems instead of constantly reacting to those problems. And if you happen to work on product or service development or delivery, user research is for you about lowering your risks for failure and reducing the time to success. That's something different from time to market. I'm also going to show you some elephants in the room. What user research is not. User research is not market research. Our focus is on how our business works for people and not the other way around. User research is not a way to show people we care about them. It's not PR or an engagement exercise, but it's a way of caring about people, even when they don't know about that or when they don't know user research is happening, and that's completely fine. They don't need to know. It's also not a technical way of testing things. It's not technical tests. It's not technology research and development. And honestly, we couldn't care less about technology, how fancy it is, rudimentary it is, how complex tech is. It's to me, whether that's pen and paper or AI, it doesn't matter to me if it works or not. And it's not only about how something is easy or difficult to use for their users. It's not about usability only. It's also about the real and the perceived value for those users on the product or the service and how that product or service is fitting their context and their case. So it's also about inclusion. More in the context of the Scottish Government and user-centered design. In the Scottish Government, we work with the Scottish approach to service design, and a big part of that is user-centered design. In the context of user-centered design, if you don't know anything about user-centered design, the only thing you need to know is that it's a design evidence-based approach and also is hypothesis-driven. What user research does there is being the backbone of all that process is bringing the evidence so it can be evidence-based and also validating those hypotheses later. User research also brings evidence and critical thinking as tools for teams to decide and design. That means we are constantly challenging teams in a controlled environment on their own views and decisions and assumptions, and that allows us to reduce the risk of failure. User research empowered teams to understand and prioritize between problems and not between solutions. So that's cleaning the strategic space for them to decide and prioritize things to solve, from tactical discussions or assumptions. And user research is also about enabling action. So it's applied research, and it doesn't matter to us how much research we conducted if that's not impacting anybody. That means it requires the wider team to be involved and engaged with us and with research and research activities. Other than that, it's just busy work. Research can be also a safe space for somebody to not act on a problem, so you shouldn't be doing that. And it's non-productive in its own and has no value on its own or deliverables, but through what we enable, which is mostly service design in the layout of our team, but it's services at the end. Now, more in the context of digital identity and user research as a digital identity program part, we are on a timeline about to go into the boots somewhere between points 1 and 2. There's some things we started to do, but there's still a lot of things we need to do. And it's very, very early on. So far, what we did is to catalog previous research and identify any evidence gaps in that research that the program already owned and did. And we built an open repository based on that, and that's something that enabled us to reuse the research and the research findings we already own, but also enables any other organization. So please be in touch if you're working on digital identity and you think we might have or know about something you could be using. That's fine. There's an open repository we can share, and later we can discuss the access to data of research there on our part. We are also trying to make in a team sport of user research on the team. As I mentioned, it doesn't mean anything if we are doing that in isolation. So we are engaging with the wider team and also with other programs and organizations that engagement already started. And part of the work we started also, it's about understanding our users, or how to understand our users in a way that could put the specific design relevant cases on the spotlight for us on digital identity. So we are doing a lot of work on understanding determinant variables for digital identity on secondary research. We, as James mentioned, produce a series of prototypes and usability test them. So not only that, we also do a lot of secondary research on usability and accessibility of authentication methods in order to produce those prototypes and validate them. And as I said, we also produce these kind of don't build these prototypes and test them on private research with users on what would be in our times in our room, in a lab, and now it's on remote online. So talking about digital identity as a problem and as a universe of potential problems out there for digital identity, we need to find a way to understand users' problems regarding digital identity. And a way of understanding problems is, of course, dividing them and atomizing them into something smaller you can understand and manipulate. So if you tear down that big complex problem into several others, you end up on a first level with two main clusters: the digital technology related problems people may have and the identity verification problems people may have. If you try to provide a digital identity service, you are going to deliver a solution for both. And that solution might be working and performing in a range from full satisfaction to full failure. So in that scenario, if you have on the left a success scenario or no barriers for a satisfactory service experience, as we mentioned it, on the right you will have total failure, like not having any service experience. In the corners you will find digital exclusion and identity exclusion, and in between those, the sum of those two things. So user research and our user research approach is scoping research for everything that is going between digital exclusion, identity exclusion, and a non-satisfactory experience, and trying to understand what's happening there, what's happening with that people, who are the people that are in that reddish area of this graph. A way for us to understand that is trying to identify determinant variables that we could use to understand better people and user groups inside that area. So far, these are not the only relevant variables. There's tons of other variables we're looking at, but we identified these ones as the best proxies for any other thing that could happen in those populations, and the key players and the main drivers for changes on user profiles and user behavior regarding digital identity. Those are digital literacy, device availability, the level of support requirements somebody may have or may need, and financial resilience, and their age range. And I've been here since September in the program, but the program exists it's existed for a couple of years now. Along that time range, we produced 17 user research studies. From those studies, most of them qualitative small-scale studies, we did things like sense-making sessions and thematic analysis, and targeted and tackled certain topics from all those discussions with users. This is the most mentioned themes and the most important topics we are discussing with users now. We still need a lot. Still need to do a lot of work on this to understand each of them. Probably there's one more study required for each of these words here, but this is just for you to give us to give you a sense of the things we are discussing and trying to understand from users. And that's me for user research. Thank you all. I think we have a break now until 3:05. Thanks.
Hi, folks. So really hope you enjoyed some fantastic presentations there from the team. I'm Albert King. I'm Chief Data Officer here in the Scottish Government, so I head up the Data and Digital Identity Division, and I'm really delighted to be chairing the panel discussion today. I really hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have so far. Just to confirm, there's been a few questions about whether the session's recorded, so just to confirm that we are recording this. So you can watch it again or catch up online if you have missed bits. I'll also be making the slides available via the blog. So that's all good. So now is the opportunity to get interactive. We've got lots of really great questions from you to try and get through in the next, well, about 40 minutes or so. Fortunately, we have a great panel here today from the program team to help us answer those questions. We're not relying on me, which is a bit of a relief. So we've heard from some of them already today, but I'm just going to start by asking them to introduce themselves and just say a little bit more about their role in the program, just to kind of get us warmed up. So Mike, if you could kind of start us off, that would be great.
Yes, hello, Mike Crocker. I am the service owner for Digital Identity Scotland, so tasked with delivering a service, a usable, secure, privacy-enhancing service.
Cheers, Mike. And Claire, I'll invite you to go next.
Hi, so I'm Claire Lumsden. I'm the Senior Product Manager on the programme. So my key focus is making sure that we actually deliver a product and a service that is valuable to end users, but also that it is of a really high quality. So we meet all the things around inclusion, security, as well as delivering that end value.
Brilliant, thank you. And Tom?
Yes, hi folks, I'm Tom Wallace, Service Customer Relationship Lead, and pretty much my role really segueing nicely from what Claire said, it's about doing that, but doing that with all the various potential service customers we've got to understand who can use it, when we might be able to use it, when we might be able to get into a pipeline, and really, as we kind of outlined during the presentation, really best understanding, you know, what your needs are and what your needs of your end users are. So that's really primarily my focus.
Brilliant, thanks Tom. And James, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, so I'm James. I'm the lead service designer on the program, and my principal concern is to design the service from a user-centered perspective and ensure that we're drawing on user research and service customer research to deliver a service that's fully user-centered.
Lovely stuff. And Laurie, new face for us today. Can you introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi, everyone. So I am Laurie. I am the Scottish Government's Digital Information Security Officer, and I am Head of Security for this programme. Sorry, I need to cancel this call. I'm Head of Security for this programme. I'm providing challenge and support. So it's usually me that says no when people try to do things. So.
Department of No. Okay, fantastic.
Yep.
And Gavin, you're up next.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Albert. Hi, my name's Gavin Ross. I'm the policy lead for Digital Identity Scotland. I'm really interested in the kind of the wider policy landscape and where Digital Identity Scotland might fit within the landscape of existing services. I'm also really interested to go from us having what was described about 3.5 years ago when we started as a common approach to online identity assurance to being an attribute-based approach for digital identity. And I'm also really interested to see what this might mean for the future delivery of policy across all of the Scottish Government, very much in line with how Colin described the digital strategy at the start of the presentation.
Brilliant, Gavin. And Susie, you get to go last, but by no means least.
Hi everybody, I'm Susie Braham. I lead on policy for digital identity and how that connects to wider policy across Scottish Government. I also lead on a stakeholder engagement and strategic communications for digital identity, of which this event is part, and I hope to tell you more about the much we're planning on this program to come related to stakeholder engagement and dialogue with people who are interested in the work. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Susie. So let's start off with what I hope will be a fairly straightforward question, just to kind of warm us up. And in the presentations earlier, I think we used the example of driving license and passports. And that's kind of led to a question about whether, like them, the digital identity service will be something that citizens have to pay to use or sign up for. And Claire, I wondered if you could answer that one for us.
Thanks, Albert. I'm glad you started with a relatively straightforward one. Easy one to answer. For individuals, yes, this service will be free. There's obviously a lot of complexity behind the actual sort of commercial model that needs to sit behind that with government and the sort of 128 odd organisations that may be involved. But as an end user of the service, it will be free.
Brilliant. I'm sure that'll be reassuring for people to hear. And Laurie, I'm going to come to you next. So clearly, we've had a few questions about this sort of theme. Clearly, providing a safe and secure service is, very much at the heart of our approach. And I just wondered if you could say a bit more about how secure the system will be, and any thinking about how we'll be working to ensure that identity is protected as part of the platform that we're building.
Yep, absolutely. And I could talk all day about information security and privacy, and it's absolutely fundamental to this programme. And I'm happy to speak to anybody offline about this. So we are engaging with a number of bodies covering both information security and privacy. So we've got engagement with Information Commissioner's Office underway. We have plans to reach out to the NCSC and seek some assurance from them in terms of the architecture that's going to be in place. We are going to be operating to a number of standards. So we believe that some of what we're calling the service customers, the public organisations that will be using the service, will be looking for critical national infrastructure level assurances from their supply chain. So we're working towards alignment to the standards you'd expect from NIST regulations, ISO 27001 and so on. On the privacy side, there's a proposal to look at the ISO 27701, which is a bolt-on to the 27001 standard. So there are a number of standards, a number of governance processes in place to ensure that the programme is being appropriately looked after. We have a very good security team within the programme with expertise from across the UK, providing are helping me to provide that challenge and support to the programme. Is that enough answer, or do you need some more?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And I guess maybe following on from that, we started a question about as citizens are able to sign in, I guess, across a number of different public services. How are we going to sort of ensure that that their privacy and identities aren't shared across those services in a way which compromises that privacy? It would just be useful if you could say a little bit more about any thinking on that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's still quite early in the design process for this, and we are, I mean, one of the reasons we're reaching out with the stakeholder group is to get that engagement and contribute to those thought process and the design ideas. We are working on as close to a zero knowledge platform as we can. So when a service end user, a citizen, creates an authentication account with our credential provider, they will simply present to a public body as a number 6, number 23. And the whole relationship within the SAPS ecosystem from that point is about that public body finding out who number 6 is and creating attributes about that person, which that citizen can then reuse with other parties. It is possible, there is a risk in our DPIA that the public bodies could correlate using this identifier, but it's not an identifier in the way a CAI number would be used in the NHS or your NINO number. You can have as many logins as you want. You could create one login for every public sector body. So you could be number 6 to Social Security and number 23 to Edinburgh Council. So it is possible to have as many logins as you wish. We are certainly at the moment looking at options around the procedure on the technical controls we could put in place to obfuscate this identifier. And we are open to discussion with anybody from the stakeholder group who wants to explore that further.
Brilliant, that's really helpful. And I think the key thing I'm taking from that is our commitment to ensure that we I guess recognise those any risks that are there and act to mitigate them, but also to commit to engage with people on these questions going forward. So really great that we've had some questions on that today. Mike, turning to you, you introduced this concept of lockers for holding attributes in your presentation, and there's been a couple of questions about that, about where those are going to be held and how many lockers somebody can own or control or register for. And I wondered if you could sort of expand on that concept a little bit and just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the easy, obvious question is there's no reason why you couldn't have more than one locker or more than one login. The way that we want this to work is for there to be a federation between that authentication credential that you create to your account, which is anonymous, and a locker. But there's no reason why you couldn't create more. This really is about privacy protection. So it's not about an individual service customer, a service that you're accessing, knowing where your attribute store is and whether you have more than one and what's in your attribute store. That's very much behind the curtain, and you control the curtain, and you are asked whether you are willing to give information may hold or may not hold, and it is entirely up to you at that point whether you release that information. But yeah, I mean, as Claire outlined, what we're trying to do is an iterative approach. So the first part of that will be that credential, creating a credential which is as near anonymous as we can, and there will be, multi-factor authentication around that, and it being a secure credential that we can be certain that it's the same individual coming back, even if we don't know who that individual at the start. There's further work to be done on the detail of exactly what the technology component would be that would form that locker. And indeed, we need to talk more about the branding of what we should call that. Should it be a locker? Should it be a vault? Should it be a data store? Should it, what will actually explain the use of it to individuals and engender the greatest trust in the security and the privacy protection of what it is that we're offering. So there's a lot of work to go on in unpacking all of that, which will happen later on in the year. And we have a development partner on board in company called ScotLogic, who will help us with doing that and help us with assessing the technology components that are available, which ones meet the requirements that we identify for that locker for identity verification later on, and will, it'll become much clearer as time goes on exactly what that will look like.
Thanks. Thanks for setting that out, Mike. And I guess possibly in a related question for you, Claire. So do people really want to understand a little bit more, and maybe you can help us unpack this a little bit more about what the user journey will look like. A couple of questions about whether this will, users will experience this as a centralized system that they go to, that's sort of branded, I guess, as Scottish Government and Digital Identity, or whether it's going to be experienced much more as something that happens in the background that makes those systems work effectively and puts users in control of their data and their attributes. So would you be able to say a little bit more about that, do you think?
Yes, sure, I'll try. It's a really good question, and I think it's for a service like ours, where our kind of sole reason for being is to make it easier for other services to provide their services. It's important that we get this right, and it can be a bit tricky putting another service into the middle of a customer journey that's existing. So it's really important that we make that flow through for the users as seamless as we can. We also believe, though, that there's a benefit to users in having a recognizable login, look and feel part of the journey, so that people are getting familiar and seeing the consistency of logging in through that same page again. So we would be expecting that the login will be sort of familiar as Digital Scotland, but it'll be part of the existing journey. Our work around the sort of longer term, the sort of locker and ability to save and reuse is still very iterative. There's a good bit of work to be done on that. We're going to be working pretty closely doing some co-design work on that, because that's a tricky one to get absolutely right. I'm going to pass over to James, who can maybe talk a wee bit more about kind of how we could tackle some of that co-design work and maybe the user journey as well.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Yeah, so just basically reinforcing what Claire just said there, it needs to be something that's as frictionless as possible for users, so that it doesn't feel, as I mentioned before, that they're jumping out of one service and into another. So that's one important thing. But at this point, I'd be hesitant to give too many answers about kind of what the user journey will look like, because we're shaping that user journey over time by involving users in research sessions, but also by developing our understanding of service customers, organizations, and what their needs are and what the needs of their users are. So that's something that we'd definitely be working on over time, and building those user journeys in more detail for specific sort of personas or types of archetypes of users.
You're on mute.
That wasn't terribly impressive, was it? Right, so I'll try that again. So James, hopefully you can follow on from that more smoothly than I did. We've had a few questions from people about recognising that Scotland is a part of the UK, and indeed there's lots of people here that come from outside the UK. And so how will the service, how do you envisage the service kind of supporting those kind of users who, I guess, come from maybe don't have that established connection to Scotland and supporting their interaction with public services?
Yeah, so again, I mean, it's just repeating pretty much what I've already just said, which is that we need to carry out research to understand the needs of those types of users and make sure that we're not kind of overlooking any particular accessibility or contextual needs that certain groups of users might have. And that is something that we do through user research and through testing our hypotheses or the things that we design based from the user research that we've done up to this point. So by going through that iterative process of, we reach a conclusion from user research that we think that this is a good way to particularly design a certain user journey for these types of users. And then we go to those actual user types and test prototypes with them to build that understanding and keep iterating until we reach a point where we're confident enough that this is now meeting the needs of those users.
Brilliant, thanks. And I'll maybe turn now to Tom. We've had a few questions about how we see the relationship between digital identity and other public services such as social security and health, or the patient portal. And I wondered if you could maybe say a little bit more about that and the kind of engagement we've had or are planning to have with those kind of services.
Absolutely, Albert. So yes, as you'd expect, we have had a fair number of discussions, and we'll continue to have a fair number of conversations with certainly Social Security Scotland colleagues. Very, very keen to ensure that they are as cited on what our plans are, and indeed as we go forward, we find a moment in the future where what we're able to deliver and what the service will deliver will work for that programme as well. And similarly with health, again, we've certainly had early discussions with different colleagues in different parts of health. As everyone will well be aware, health is a very large, a large body in inverted commas. But we have kicked off some of those discussions, and we'll continue to have them. And I know indeed some of the specific questions in the background there. I've already responded and emailed out some of the individuals that have asked them, and kind of reaching out and really keen to kind of continue those conversations and those discussions to understand what their needs are, which parts of this service might work for them and which parts might not work, depending again on what their specific needs are, what level of security they might require in relation to the information that they hold, and the information that they sit on. And I think it is important to highlight that again, what this is not is that this locker, for example, becomes where all bits of information that a service needs for an individual. It's not that all those bits of information would be offered into that locker of the individual. It would really be that conversation and discussion that we'd be having with the different service customers to understand, what they'd be willing, I suppose, to offer the individual, but also with other service customers understanding what information, validated information, they would then find useful from another individual. So again, what we're really keen, I guess, to continue is to pick up and have those discussions and those conversations, and that's something that myself and the team are certainly very keen to ensure that we do.
Thanks very much, Tom. And just a wee follow on from that, I mean, I guess you possibly answered this question, but I want to make sure that we do answer it. So if an organisation is interested in participating, engaging, being part of that pilot, I guess you're the guy to speak to and you'll be in touch with them. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, Albert. I mean, I'll be surprised if they haven't, if someone hasn't in an organisation heard from us. But hopefully, what we're hoping that today is getting that awareness to a broader number within those organisations and really picking up those conversations. So if there's people out there who haven't heard of me programme, then please fill out the form that Susie's shared a link to, and expect to hear from us in the back of that. And the same goes in a sense for what. For example, James needs when it comes to service design, and indeed what we need in terms of user research and things like that. But I'm keen to be that kind of focal point for any of those types of interactions to broker the right conversations with the right people.
Brilliant. And I kind of wanted to kind of follow up on that with Gavin. Clearly local government is a key partner for us in the programme, involved in delivering lots of public services. I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about how we're engaging with local government, and maybe touch as well on what kind of support might be available for local government in transitioning from existing services into this new digital identity world.
Yeah, sure, no problem, Albert. So Colin said right at the beginning that the digital strategy is a common approach and partnership between Scottish Government and local government, and we obviously recognise that's an important part of implementing the digital strategy. We also talked about right at the outset common standards and common platforms, and we want to have shared platforms as much as possible across government. We've also said throughout the presentation so far today we're going to take kind of small steps along the way to help us achieve that. So what Digital Identity Scotland are looking to do is whilst we're looking to deliver benefits in the longer term, we're also well aware of the important role that My Account plays in delivering services for local authorities and others. We kind of realise that all products and components for Digital Identity Scotland are not just going to be built, designed and integrated all at once, but ultimately we do have a strong presumption around having a kind of a single secure sign-on for Scotland being one of those components. So we also have an open mind on technology and integration of kind of these new and existing components. So we are working jointly with Improvement Service along with our development partner, Scott Logic, as we develop our product roadmap, and I suppose our initial focus will be on that single secure sign-on. But we also do recognise we need to take kind of things one stage at a time. I think it's also really important to mention that kind of continuity of services for local authorities and their customers will remain a priority. We do recognise in order to develop any kind of successful digital public service to be used across Scotland, we need to ensure that the needs of local authorities are met. So I think that the best way to articulate this is that the Digital Identity Scotland programme's got a really good working relationship with colleagues at Improvement Service, and we do plan to work together on a joint project to deliver common components, and that's really the agreed way forward for us. In terms of support, the second part of your question, Albert, I suppose that's something that we're going to need to understand more around and uncover in due course. I think the best way to really explain that is we are doing things in small steps and taking into account the whole landscape of services, how they are at the moment and how local authorities work just now. We lean quite heavily on the expertise and operational capability that Improvement Service have and their strong relationship with local authorities to help us shape decisions that we might take in that.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Gavin. And of course, that local government ecosystem is only one part of the, if you like, digital identity ecosystem that we're interacting with and that we need to be thinking about as we take forward the programme. So that rather smooth link will take us into thinking about UK government, which is another important part of that ecosystem. There's been quite a bit of interest actually in the questions about the relationship between this programme and the UK government's thinking on digital identity, both in the context of Verify and the digital identity framework. And Mike, I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about the programme's thinking on those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have been interacting with GDS and DCMS now for over 2 years, and originally did a pilot where we looked at using the Verify system as a potential source of an identity provider. There's been a lot of change and churn in this space in the UK generally over the last couple of years, and I'd like to think that we've now broadly got a similar position that we are following. So, for example, GDS are working at the moment on a single login, gov.uk login. Gov.uk accounts, they're calling it. And that's looking very similar to the work that we've been doing on, this separation of an ability to create an account, an anonymous account, and be able to use it to log into services, and separating that away from the larger barrier of having to prove your identity that you only really need to do later in the process when you are accessing a service that requires that. And perhaps the service doesn't even require that at all. Perhaps it only needs a single attribute of proving you're over 18, for example. So I think we're all moving in that general direction. Where we have input into the consultation around DCMS Trust Framework. We think there's a lot of good work there. The focus in that is very much more from a public sector basis of public sectors getting access to government-held data, albeit with individuals' control or consent or permission. We don't feel that what is proposed there is quite right, because it doesn't feel as though it has a defined role for the citizen in that trust framework, which we think is something that's missing. I think that there are other parts of UK government, other UK government departments that share that view and that vision. There are other parts of UK government, other departments that are looking much more at a kind of attribute-led system. So there's a lot of work going on in this space. I think there will continue to be a lot of churn over the next year, but it's beginning to form around, I hope, what we have outlined, which is an ability to log in and then an ability to add attributes, known, verified facts about yourself to that account, that login. So yeah, as I say, there's a lot of work going on in this. We are acutely aware of everything that GDS, DCMS, Ministry of Justice, DWP, DVLA, HMPO. There's a lot going on here, and we are keeping in touch with all of them and sharing our notes and our workings all the way through to try to make sure that whatever happens at the end is interoperable and has proper federated access.
Well, that's really helpful, Mike. And it's good to hear that there's that sort of strong level of communication engagement between the team and the various UK government departments working in this space. Is there anything in particular you'd want to add about any thinking about the connection between digital identity and trust and private sector? And I'm thinking here in particular, what DCMS is starting to explore in its digital identity trust framework, and where that's going.
Yes, I mean we have stated right from the start that we're creating a very closely defined ecosystem. That what we are trying to do is to enable the sharing of information between public sector organisations, but for that to be very much under the control of the individual citizen. So by placing, there's a lot of money spent in the public sector on making sure that we are delivering services to the right people. But in general, it's done on a kind of organisation by organisation basis. What we want to do is to try to make sure that we unlock that value. And we do that by having the citizen as the point at which that value is placed. So if an organisation has spent significant sums of money in proving that I live in Ratho at this particular address, then why should they not offer that to me and allow me to take it with me when I go to the next service and give it to them if I so choose? And that really is the vision that we have there. It's about empowering the individual. So it's not about enabling a private sector organisation to access it and charging them to get that information, because all that will happen is that private sector organisation will hike up the price and I'll have to pay it anyway. So if it's my data, give it to me and allow me to make a choice of where I use it. So I started out by saying that we've very closely defined it as a public sector ecosystem. Once the data is in that data store, that locker, there is nothing that would stop an individual owning it, taking it elsewhere. All we're saying is that, for the organizations that are within that ecosystem, we have a shared liability. Once you start using that externally, the liability implications become very, very difficult, as is already being seen in some of the DCMS trust framework and the Verify framework before that. So we're trying to simplify it to make it easier to get it in, but without limiting its potential use in the longer term.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Mike. So I kind of wanted to turn now to talk a little bit about kind of public engagement. There were a couple of questions about from people just about essentially trying to get an understanding of what we've been doing in the past in the program on engagement and in fact user research. And I wondered whether, Susie, you could maybe start us off, and then James, whether there was anything you wanted to add just on kind of how we've been going about this in the program over the last few years.
Sure. Thanks very much, Albert. So we are developing our approach to communications and engagement in parallel with the delivery timescale, which Claire was talking about in the presentations earlier. So we have plans to develop a much more detailed stakeholder engagement plan, which is being developed as we speak, and which should appear over the next few weeks. And that will include engagement with specific sectors who are interested in this work, and including what we hope to be a strong public engagement strand. Now, I know that there are some really good examples of public engagement that colleagues elsewhere are doing. For example, the Ethical Digital Nation Expert Advisory Group have had a whole series of people's panels, exploring issues around digital ethics, and I would love to be able to replicate something like that involving a third-party organization to help facilitate this some quality engagement over some of the issues, because there's absolutely certain things that we'd love to hear a bit more about how people respond in terms of public trust and confidence about using this system. And I think that there's a level of engagement that we need that is one step between the service design user research based, which considers how individuals are interacting at individual interfaces with a service, and a much larger scale, which is around people's perceptions and attitudes. Will they use the service? Do they feel like they can trust it? Do they feel that their personal data will be secure? Are there ways that we should be explaining to people about how this new system will operate, how it will work, and what those privacy and protections are? So that's what we're planning to deliver. Watch this space. There'll be more appearing on the digital blog, and we're going to be using some of the contact information and sectoral information that you've provided on your future involvement forms in order to engage with some of the people that have come along today. So I'll hand over to James, who can talk a bit more about the user research angle to this.
Thanks, Susie. So we have research going back to the start of the programme, which included an initial discovery study. Since then, the user research team headed by Daniel have been gathering lots of secondary research from various different sources and analysing and synthesising that data to find what's useful in there in relation to digital identity. And more recently than that, we've been testing prototypes for the secure sign-on component, as that's the first phase of development. And we're continuing to engage with users, and we have 2 weeks of intensive user research starting next week, which will answer some service level questions and also will allow us to test some more of the prototypes that we're designing. But that will continue as we partner more with organisations. So, touching on the point that was raised earlier about kind of inclusivity and around different types of users and different archetypes, but as we partner with organisations, we will find more opportunities to do that. So getting exposure to the users of partner organisations will be really important to us to make sure that we can develop something that is inclusive and accessible across the different services and the different types of users that engage with, that interact with services.
Thanks, James. And just actually, as you touch on inclusion there was somebody kind of picked us up on, when we're talking about inclusivity and we're talking about inclusion in the programme, what do we mean by that? And what are the kind of questions that we're considering when we're trying to address that issue?
So I'll pick that one up. I guess on the there are so many dimensions to this for a program like digital identity, and I think Daniel touched a bit on some of the work we're doing, that there's so many different factors that can lead to exclusion, both on the digital side and on the identity side. We're lucky in Scottish Government that we're leveraging so much existing knowledge from other programmes and teams across Scottish Government. And in particular, for example, we're going to be using the design patterns that are used in gov.scot, which have already undergone a lot of inclusivity and accessibility testing. Going back to the point that James has mentioned a few times, organisations that offer public services really know their users well. So by engaging with those organisations, they can help us understand their users and understand all the ways in which people might be excluded unintentionally from our services, and that so that we can take steps to design to avoid that happening. Our continual iteration approach is also really key in this. We'll be testing right across representative groups of users, users of all types, and including in that accessibility needs as one dimension of inclusion, and we'll be ensuring that we can get those insights back into the programme and actually make the changes before and indeed after we're going live, if we spot anything after we go live, so that we're getting that right. James, would you like to add anything more on that?
No, I think you covered it perfectly there, Claire. It's just, about sort of bringing people from services into the picture and helping us build the service out according to the needs of your users. So I think that's enough to be said about that, probably.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Claire and James. And Susie, just coming back to you, I mean, you talked us through very helpfully there sort of plans around public engagement and forthcoming coming soon plan that you're working on. I guess it's clear from some of the questions that the sort of the messaging around the platform is and the approach and the program is really, really important. And there's a kind of recognition, I guess, that government uses data in all sorts of ways. Sometimes, as in this case, to provide services, and sometimes to do things like analysis and research. And I wondered whether you could maybe say a little bit about how the program is positioning itself distinctively and just making sure that people understand where there are separations and ensuring that we don't conflate these two things and just expand on that a little bit more.
Sorry, Albert, I'm struggling to understand the question. Separate the two. Separate which issues?
Separate the issues of the way government uses data for things like research, for statistics, for example. So, if we're doing analytics into sort of public policy questions, and I guess government might have a legitimate interest in looking at some of the attributes, for example, that citizens would be asserting through this approach. But separate that from service delivery, which I guess is where digital identity is operating, and the sort of controls that are in place in the program and the thinking that's in place in the program around that. And if you're not the right person to answer that question, incidentally, I do apologise, and do send me in the right direction.
Sorry, Albert. I don't think I'm the right person to answer that one.
Maury, would you be able to pick that one up?
Yeah, I think I can cover some of this. I've just seen there's a really interesting comment, Jean Ingalls there, about the Estonia's approach, and okay, that's national ID, and that's not what we're talking about, but just about sharing data. We know at UK government level, they're talking about sharing data between the public organisations. That's absolutely not what we're doing in Scotland. The citizen is in control of their vault, their container at all times. There was another comment about, could a public authority access that vault? And the answer is no. The citizen would need to consent to provide you the information that you require, and then they would send it to you. You wouldn't be able to just drill into their container. So I think, sorry, I'm kind of missing what the question is myself, Albert, but I'm probably the right person to answer it. You want to try?
Yeah, my understanding of the approach is that citizens are in control of their data and the attributes. So is it fair to say that they won't be available immediately to, for example, a statistician in government or somebody else in government who wants to look at that data?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the case. It's completely within citizens' control. In fact, even if we were approached under the crime and taxation exemption from UK GDPR, there are questions that we need to answer internally around whether we, even if we were able to comply, what could we provide? Because the DIS service doesn't actually have access to any of the information in these containers. It's completely under the citizens' control. At best, we can probably signpost the authority to the public body that may have verified the attribute and provide a timestamp, but we wouldn't be able to say, yeah, this is Laurie Brown's address. So there are real questions around there, and if the research body was looking to do some even anonymised kind of bulk data level research, it's the citizen that's in control of the data, and they may or may not consent to that operation. And as Jean had suggested, the Estonian model of perhaps allowing citizens to consent to that type of activity as part of this journey is something that we can certainly consider, but it's not something that I had thought about before.
Yeah, I mean, if I can come in there, Albert, I mean, it's the basic difference between dynamic consent and static consent. And that's been, the kind of debate that we've had right from the start. And we've been clear that access to an individual's data is always on the basis of dynamic consent. They have to be there. They have to click a button. They have to understand what is going on. They have to have a screen in front of them saying that this organisation wants to know your date of birth. Are you happy to release it to them? And click the button saying yes. So that's one aspect of it. Once that organisation has your date of birth, then they will use it, using whatever legal basis that they have for retaining that information to provide you with that service. Now, we can. There's an argument that at some point, individuals are going to get fed up of being asked the question, "Do you want to share your data?" And they will go, "Well, of course I want to share my data. I trust this system." But we have an issue in this country about trust around identity systems. So I don't want to set out by assuming that individuals will want to give static consent for any part of Scottish Government to access their data. If there is a clamour a year, 2 years down the line to say, oh, for God's sake, stop asking me if I want to consent to my data being released to different parts of Scottish Government, then we can look at the ability to iterate and bring in a system that might have static consent, where people could log in to some sort of dashboard and say, yes, I'm happy for my name, my address, my date of birth to be shareable across any part of Scottish public sector estate. But these other attributes, no, not a chance. You have to ask me if you want to get access to them. These are things that we can look at in the future. But I think that to start small and to start with a system that can engender trust and can deal with some of the historic angst that we have as a nation about data sharing, then we start with a very clear principle that the individual has to be present, has to understand, and has to give that explicit consent for the sharing of the data.
Beautifully put, Mike. So really very much putting the citizen there in the driving seat as data is used in the programme, which is, I think, all the time we have for questions today. So I'm just going to kind of wrap things up, and I just wanted to kind of reiterate, I think, some of the messages that Colin Cook was talking about at the start of the conversation today. You know, at its core, the Digital Identity Programme is about delivering on our commitment to digital government and services that work for all. And that means services that are inclusive and designed around people's needs, rather than designed around the structures, organisational traditions and so forth that provide them. So digital identity, a really important part of our critical national digital infrastructure that will enable improvement in our public services and empower citizens, and provide that safe, secure, easy way for people to prove that they're eligible for a service or benefit online, and in doing so, do that in a way that earns and sustains public trust and confidence. And, you know, just thinking about the session today and the presentations we've heard and the huge amount of interest and fantastic questions we've had, you know, I hope you've agreed that it's been a really great session, and it's been fantastic to see that amount of interest. I am conscious that we haven't been able to directly, you know, answer all the questions today. So we'll be looking at those, and just to reassure you, we'll be publishing a blog. And if you haven't had the opportunity to get an answer today, you know, you can see how to get in touch with us there on your screen just now. So to build trust and confidence and ensure we design around people's needs, you know, obviously means essential that that we do that in a way that engages with the public, that engage with experts as well, and we do that through our expert group. And the event today is a great example of what we're doing around public engagement, and we're renewing that commitment today, actually, through this event. And I just want to be clear that this is not about just telling people what we're doing. We're very much listening. This is about renewing that engagement at a point where there's very much the opportunity to shape how we take this forward as we realise the programme. And we're very much looking to get something out there through our MVP that enables people to interact and gives you an opportunity to feed back to us as we develop the live service. And as Susie was saying, you know, in her answer earlier on, we'll be creating more opportunities for various forms of dialogue around particular issues, particular themes, more focused conversations. And today's just very much been a starter. So in the meantime, it would be great if you could engage, if you could register your interest. There's lots of ways to sign up, including, as Susie was saying, by following the future involvement link, which I think is up there on your screens, through the conference platform. Connect with us on social media, email us, subscribe to our blog. So many ways to get in touch and to connect with us. So really all that remains for me to do is to say thanks very much to our speakers, to our fantastic panel, and to the folks who have helped us to put this event together. But most importantly of all, of course, thanks to you for joining us today and participating and helping us to start to explore some of these questions. Thank you very much indeed.